But I think it's really important for us to recognize that this is a crazy time, and it's okay to be gentle with yourself. It's okay to dial back and do what you need to do to, get your obligations and your responsibilities done. But, like if you can't, be the best homeschool parent ever, it's okay. Your child is going to be fine.
Hello and welcome to the Sunshine Parenting Podcast, where each week we talk about ideas for raising kids who become thriving adults. I'm your host, Audrey Monkey. Here on the podcast, I share my experiences raising 5 kids who currently range in age from 16 to 26 and working with thousands more as a summer camp director over the past 3 decades. I'm the author of Happy Campers, and I frequently do workshops with parents, teachers, and summer camp professionals about social skills, connection, and happiness, topics I researched extensively for my master's in psychology. If you want tools for raising kind, optimistic, self-reliant kids who become thriving adults, you've come to the right place. Hey, Sunshine Parenting listeners. Welcome to episode 154, which is first being released on Friday, August 28th, 2020. My one simple thing tip for this week was inspired by this week's interview, and it is to make sure that you formally set up a venting buddy during this pandemic. You may already have a friend or family member who you speak with regularly and share what you're going through, and that's great. But it's good to formalize that you are each other's venting buddy so that you both know that you're going to have the opportunity when you're talking to each other regularly to each share what's going on, especially the hard parts of your life. By setting this up and knowing that you have that person who you can go to share and vent the problems and the stresses that you're facing, and that they will equally be able to share with you, you will lessen the burden on the other people in your life, like coworkers, your spouse, your children. It will benefit you to reduce your stress by having your own venting buddy and to know that you're going to be there for each other. My guest this week is Dr. Courtney Thomas Tobin. Courtney is an assistant professor in the Department of Community Health Sciences at the UCLA School of Public Health. Courtney has a PhD in sociology from Vanderbilt University, and she studies issues of race-based stress, coping, and mental health among Black Americans. You may remember Courtney from back in episode 145 when I interviewed her and her husband Danny about welcoming a Black son in 2020. In today's interview, I talk with Courtney about her research as well as her advice for coping with the stress that we're all under during this pandemic. I really appreciate Courtney's wisdom and advice, and I know you'll appreciate it as well. Enjoy this episode. Welcome back to Sunshine Parenting, Courtney.
Thank you for having me.
It's so fun to get to talk to you again. I talked to you and Danny. I guess it feels like a long time ago, but I think it was just the beginning of the summer, right?
Yeah, time's flying.
So, Courtney, I am just so excited to talk to you about, you just have a lot of knowledge about things that can help us, I think, during this time. So why don't you tell listeners a little bit about your background, specifically kind of your education, your research, your job that you do now?
Sure. Well, I'm an assistant professor at UCLA School of Public Health in the Department of Community Health Sciences. And so I work with a great bunch of really interdisciplinary scholars, and we really try to study a broad array of health issues. And my area of expertise, or my specialty area, is really dealing with stress, coping, and mental health. And so my background is kind of varied in the way I got into this work. I always tell my students, I'm like, you never know how you're going to get into the things that you're really passionate about, but it kind of is a funny story. So I always say I originally wanted to be a dentist back as an undergrad, which Thinking about it now, it's really kind of funny. So I wanted to be a dentist, and I was always interested in like health disparities and helping, people from disadvantaged backgrounds get really, healthy. And I worked in a dentist office, and up until my junior year as an undergrad, I was determined to be a dentist, until I did a dentistry summer program, where we kind of actually like shadowed dentists and did that. And I was like kind of bored. So for me, I started looking at other options and realized that I could still do work that involved, trying to solve health disparities and working with underserved populations by doing research. And so I ended up going to graduate school at Vanderbilt, with it's a public health and sociology program. So my doctorate is in sociology, and I worked with folks over at Meharry Medical College to get background in public health and health policy. Ended up doing a postdoc program at UCLA, and I've been here ever since, here in California. So kind of a roundabout way to get to the work that I do, but it really has provided me with some interesting perspectives about kind of combining sociology, psychology, public health, and thinking about kind of the ways that minorities, particularly Black Americans, experience stress, and the ways that folks can cope with stress, and how we can do that to improve wellness and mental health. So yeah.
Well, it seems like with all of the current focus and more awareness about the racial disparities, do you think this is going to be helpful for your research to get more people listening to you and hearing what you have to say?
Oh, definitely. I think now it seemed like even just maybe 10 years ago, you had to kind of argue that health disparities existed. So like we would always have to start off our research really trying to argue that point. And now I think it's something that's more accepted, recognized by even the general public. And so, I think we've come a long way, even in this very short time, of recognizing that the disparities are there. And so researchers now, we're really in a better place to be able to say, okay, so why are these disparities happening? And so we can really focus more of our attention on, figuring out why disparities are happening, and then actually figuring out solutions, rather than trying to argue the point that they exist. So we're being a lot more productive nowadays.
Okay, well, that's good. Well, I know you haven't probably, since you just had a baby and you've been out, maybe not researching as much lately, but with COVID, I think this has really brought it to the surface, hasn't it? Because we're seeing that minorities are getting inordinately more cases. And can you, just from your research, can you kind of explain why that's happening?
Yeah, and so with COVID and with most of the health disparities that we see people of color, people with lower socioeconomic status experiencing more cases or more worse health issues. And the reason why essentially comes down to structural issues. So in a lot of cases, you see economic disparities at the root cause of a lot of these challenges. And thinking about COVID specifically, you're thinking about who are our essential workers, right? So who are the folks that are unable to stay at home and do social distancing in ways? So folks that work in hospitality or service industries, particularly in California, we're seeing the number of Latino cases skyrocketing. And so it's folks who are not able to, as a function of their position in society, are not able to be healthy in the ways that they would want to. And so we're seeing those cases. And in my research, that's essentially what we see, the same thing dealing with, psychological health and physical health conditions. We see those same patterns. Essentially, when folks don't have the resources, or even when they do have the resources, we see things like the neighborhoods in which they live get fewer resources. The schools that they live in have fewer resources, so we see these disparities kind of across the board, from younger kids not being able to have access to remote learning, or certain school districts having to put Wi-Fi on buses because their students don't have access to Wi-Fi. So you see these disparities kind of across the board. And at the end of the day, it comes down to these structural issues versus anything like genetics or, predisposition by a certain group. It's really the society in which we live that's causing these issues.
So, I know it's a very complicated thing, and you probably don't try to answer all the problems. I know you're doing the research, but what are some ways that, when you think about individual people or, ways, how can a normal general person help with this? Like, is it just awareness? Is it activism? Like, what are things that you're seeing that are helpful to kind of move the needle so that there aren't as big of disparities?
Well, one, I would say like the average person, one, awareness goes a long way. And kind of recognizing like your place within this system, right? We all have our kind of balances of like disadvantages and privileges, right? And so thinking about, okay, what are the ways in which I'm privileged and what can I do in my position to help other people? So even if it's things like, we saw a lot of folks donating their time or their money or efforts to like food banks, so like you can help with like structural disadvantages as an individual by like providing your help and your service to places that help try to tackle some of those like bigger structural issues. Volunteering goes a long way, so it's not like a lot of times in the work that we do, you feel very powerless because these are, like you said, huge issues, right? And so it's like, I would say, try to figure out your kind of gift. What can you do? And just work on that one small thing. And, while spreading the word to other people and telling people like these are issues. I think, like this summer when we talked before, we talked about there's kind of been this awakening in our country right now, right? Like people are recognizing like, there's a lot of things wrong and there's a lot of things that, I didn't recognize before. And so, I think using that awakening as a way to like motivate yourself and like to, share that information with your friends, your family, your kids, and try to make like activism and like being, involved in social justice a part of like your everyday life. That can go a long way.
Yeah. Well, that's encouraging because it does seem overwhelming like all things, but I love how you just shared that because we were talking to our campers this summer about that same thing, like use whatever your gifts are, like if there's something that bothers you about the world, you maybe won't be able to, you're not going to start a big nonprofit or change policy, but you can take one small step to do something to make a little positive change in that area. And if a lot of people do a little bit, that can add up to change. So that's really, I'm actually really excited that we're in a time that we'll hopefully get to see change that's been needed for a long time. So, and it's wonderful that there are people like you that have been doing this work for so long, kind of against maybe, kind of against the wind, because like you said, you had to sort of prove before you could even get into the details. It was like you had to prove that there was the disparity. But now that we've solved that and everyone knows that, now hopefully we can say, okay, well, what do we need to do to move forward on this?
Exactly.
So Courtney, another area of your expertise that I think could be very helpful for my listeners is your interest and your research about coping with stress. I think this year for a lot of people and especially parents, it has been very, very stressful. And I know, some people are coping better than others, but all of us, we're now going into the fall for those of people with school-age kids. There's a lot of stress about work and kids and childcare. There's so much going on. So do you have any advice or helpful words of wisdom for parents who are just feeling like they need some help coping with all the stress right now?
Yeah, so as a very new parent, I feel like I'm new to the game. It's like parenting stress as a whole new level to all the other stuff we're dealing with, right? And not only just worrying about you, but like worrying about how your child's gonna like deal with everything. And so, kind of depending on what your situation is, I think there's a lot of strategies that we can take to cope and to feel better. One of the things I like to do and I think is really helpful is to try to stay in contact or like set up like a buddy system. So like I have another friend of mine, a girlfriend who recently had a baby as well. And we're both kind of at home going a little stir crazy with these infants, right? And so we set up a time to like just quickly FaceTime each other like every other day or so, just to check in. And a lot of times, we hate to just call people just, and we feel like we're bothering them or, everybody has their own problems. But, just to have someone to check in with consistently and you have that kind of agreement that like whatever's going on, you're going to check in with each other. I think that can go a long way because most of us, especially now, we're feeling very isolated, not as many people to talk to. And most of the time you feel bad about like complaining to somebody, right? And so, you want to have those opportunities to just like, you're just going to vent, and you have that understanding with your buddy that like, I'm just going to just vent and complain for like however long you need, and that person's there for it, and you don't have to feel bad about doing that. And really just that one outlet can do wonders, because a lot of times we don't have the time or the space or even the energy to really process what's going on, because we're like, moving day by day, right? And so that I think can go a long way. Another tip, I know our movements are kind of limited right now, like where we can go, but if you can just kind of figure out a way to have a little alone time, like even if it's, in the morning before the kids get up, if you can just sit outside on your porch, just 5 minutes to yourself, and kind of, dig out that time to have some meditation. I use meditation apps all the time. I find it super helpful. I use Calm, Headspace. There's lots of free ones out there that are really useful. And I know a lot of people say that, meditation is hard to do. Our minds are really busy. But there's super easy ones that are like really guided, and they kind of talk you through it. And so I think using those kind of apps and those kind of tools to give yourself some time to breathe before like everything's going on, and even, thinking about trying to figure out ways to help you stay calm throughout the day is really, really useful. And then also kind of just telling yourself that like, at this point, I think being gentle with yourself. I've been, mentoring a lot of my grad students who will call me and check in. They're just saying, Dr. Thomas Tobin, I have so much going on. I don't know how I'm going to deal with all this. And I'm, I want to take these 3 classes and do all this. And I just tell them, do the minimum right now. Like, this is a really crazy, unprecedented time for us. And I think, a lot of us are trying to hold ourselves to the same standard that we would any other time. But I think it's really important for us to recognize that this is a crazy time, and it's okay to be gentle with yourself. It's okay to dial back and do what you need to do to, get your obligations and your responsibilities done. But, like if you can't, be the best homeschool parent ever, it's okay. Your child is going to be fine. Like you can't, do all these activities and do all these different things you wanted to do. It's okay. And just being really, I think, forgiving with yourself, and like I say, give yourself some grace to, you're going to mess up and things aren't going to be perfect right now. But I think a lot of times we're our own like worst critics. And so I think being really gentle with yourself right now can go a long way.
Oh my gosh. I just want to like take that little sound bite and just listen to it every day. That was so good, Court. It is so true. I think that the do the minimum thing really resonates with me, because it is kind of true. I think I know probably you have that same personality where going into this, I was like, oh, I'll have time to do like more writing, and I'll have so much, I'll be so productive. And it's like my brain really can't be productive right now. I'm fine with doing the minimum, but I just love that. I think that we all need to just be nicer to ourselves, and maybe that will just help with the coping, because I think part of our stress comes from we're not doing what we think we're supposed to be doing, where nobody knows what we're supposed to be doing right now anyway. And we better just relax and just like go through this, because we don't really have control over, when school goes back, when our jobs get back on track and everything else. So that's really, really good advice. So are your graduate students, how are they responding? How many of these people call you, and like, are you like their go-to person because they've really bonded with you at school?
Yeah, I advise maybe about 5 or so students right now. And so, I try to keep tabs on them. Even since I've been on leave, I'm like, okay, let's still check in. Let's make sure, I like to make sure that they're doing okay, because, I always think, as hard as it is for like us adults, for folks that are a bit younger, this is extra crazy. They had all these expectations about what school is and what, their experience was going to be. And this is anything but. And so I think, hearing somebody who can reassure them that it's going to be okay, and, that it's not what they may have expected, but things are just going to be fine. I think they need to hear that. And I think we all need to hear that,
For sure. Well, interesting too. I bet being able to mentor people or like maybe help out, that probably helps a little bit with your own stress, I would imagine too, because when you're able to just like do something to maybe just help someone else or let them vent to you, that can help you feel better too. That's always that, like, that thing. It's like when you do something for someone else, it actually also helps you. So I think that's another really good strategy. Well, any other wisdom or ideas that you have to share? Anything that you've learned as a new mom that's helping you cope with stress?
Well, like I said, I think really it's just my biggest like thing that I tell myself is just go with the flow. I think one of those people, I like to have schedules and be in control. And as many folks know, when you have a newborn, it doesn't quite work that way. So, Jameson has been, I guess, my biggest joy and my biggest challenge in like a lot of fun ways, kind of learning more about myself and being able to let go and just let it happen and just really enjoy the time that I have with him because, he's already 3 months. It's kind of crazy how fast time is flying. So I always tell myself, just go with the flow, let it happen. He's going to be fine. We're going to be fine. And yeah, just try to relax.
That's so good. So what's your schedule now? You're on sabbatical for a while, and then when do you go back in the classroom or back to your research?
Well, I'm hoping to get back to some research in the next month or two. We're trying to just find a regular babysitter so we can see how that goes. And the plan is to get back into research. Fortunately, I don't have to teach this year in like a formal setting, which is really nice. I think with all the virtual learning, it's a little crazy this year. So yeah, I'm spending this year kind of focusing on my research and working with my students. So
do you have a particular like thing that you're focusing on yet, or do you know yet what your research is going to be about this year?
Yeah, so I'm doing a lot of work really focusing on mental health and depression among Black Americans and looking at race-based stress. So it's very timely again. So kind of thinking about some of the mechanisms that really drive the experiences of race-based stress and how people kind of process that and how that may or may not lead to more depression.
Well, that's going to be really interesting. I hope you get some articles. I know that, in academic journals, there, the language and the research language is very technical and everything. I hope you also can get some articles in some mainstream, for the lay people to read.
That's cool.
because this is such an important topic, and mental health, especially with adolescents, and now we also know with Black Americans and minorities, we've got to get a handle on this. And it was bad before the pandemic. It's been an issue now for quite a long time. And so I'm excited to hear what your research, what you find, and hopefully you can help solve. This is the way you're making the world a better place, right? You're going to solve this problem for us.
Hope so.
It's great. Well, Courtney, it's been lovely to talk with you again, and I can't wait to circle back after you've done some more research and see what other wisdom you can share with us from the work that you're doing. I feel very encouraged by your words, and I'm going to write down tons of quotes that you just shared with us, because I think a lot of it comes down to what we're telling ourselves and these messages in the day-to-day, that we know now we're in a marathon. We've got to like relax, sit back a little bit, and just like realize that we just have to get a buddy, yes. get a vent buddy, yes. And be a little easier on ourselves during this time, and on each other, I think too.
Definitely. Like give each other some grace. It'll be okay.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thanks so much for coming on, Courtney.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining me for my chat with Courtney this week on the podcast. I really feel encouraged by Courtney's wisdom and advice, and I have many takeaway quotes that she shared that I am going to be putting on sticky notes around my house to remind me how to cope with stress during this season and every other one. My favorite this week is an excellent resource from Dr. Dan Siegel called The Healthy Mind Platter. Check the link in the show notes to look at the graphic and the description of the 7 parts of what we need to have a healthy mind, including sleep time, physical time, focus time, connecting time, play time, downtime, and time in. I'm so excited to be part of a fun new initiative through my camp, Gold Arrow Camp, called the Gold Arrow Camp Teacher Academy. You can find out all about it at goldarrowcamp.com/teacher-academy. The Gold Arrow Teacher Academy, or GATA, is offering monthly webinars for members where we are covering all kinds of ideas and tips for connecting with students and creating fun and growth and friendship for kids. We're also having weekly supportive chats with our members, as well as weekly PDFs with no prep or low prep connection activities that teachers can use in the classroom, whether virtual or live this year. Check the link in the show notes and please share with the teachers in your life about GATA, which is going to be such a supportive and fun environment for teachers to connect and grow this year. As always, you can find notes, links, and other resources related to today's conversation by visiting my website at sunshine-parenting.com. While you're there, be sure to sign up for my email list so that you don't miss out on any of the great resources I have available for raising thriving kids. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd really appreciate you sharing it with a friend. Please take a moment to give Sunshine Parenting a rating or review on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. Let's end with a quote from my book, Happy Campers. Creating a close and connected family culture that promotes positive, lifelong relationships is the most important thing we can do for our children. Warm and supportive parent-child relationships, a sense of being loved, and help and support from family members serve as protective factors and increase children's resilience and their ability to face many of life's inevitable challenges. I'm Audrey Monkey. Thank you for joining me for the Sunshine Parenting Podcast. Join me again next week for more conversations about raising kids who become thriving adults.